My name is Rachel Morgan. I am 36 years old, and if you stay with me, if you let this story unfold, I promise you will see more than a tale about money. You'll see what family can give, what it can take away, and what you might discover in the empty space left behind. If family stories like this matter to you, I invite you to walk alongside me. You can even subscribe here so you'll know when the next chapter arrives. The title is simple, but every word was written in fire. They gave my inheritance to my brother. I built an empire anyway. It began at the dinner table. We were all there that Sunday night, the same polished oak table that had carried Thanksgiving turkeys and birthday cakes for decades. My father sat at the head, shoulders straight like always. My mother moved with her careful grace, refilling glasses of iced tea, correcting the salt shaker's place as though that mattered. My brother leaned back in his chair, the golden child in his favorite spot, basking in a light only he could see. The food was perfect. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, cornbread still warm. To an outsider, it was a postcard, an American family framed in laughter and candlelight. But if you've ever been in a room where words weigh more than the food on the plates, you'll know what came next. My father cleared his throat. A simple sound, but one that silenced the clinking of forks. He placed his napkin on the table with deliberate care, as though folding it would prepare us for the words to come. "Your brother," he began, "will inherit the estate. The house, the accounts, the investments, everything is already arranged." That was it, no explanation, no pause to measure the shock, just a verdict delivered as casually as passing the salt. I sat still, waiting for my name to follow. It didn't. My brother glanced at me with a faint smile, not cruel, but certain, like a man who has never had to wonder if the world was tilted in his favor. My mother lifted her glass, her lips pressed against the rim, her eyes sliding past mine as though I were a stranger visiting their home. It's hard to describe the sensation of being erased. One moment you are a daughter, a thread in the fabric of a family. The next, you are heir, present but unseen, uncounted. I didn't protest. My voice caught somewhere between my heart and my throat. If I had spoken, they would have called it dramatic, maybe ungrateful. So instead, I learned the taste of silence. It was bitter, metallic, like biting down on a coin. Dinner went on. The chicken cooled, the cornbread hardened, the conversation drifted back to football scores and the neighbor's new fence. My inheritance had vanished into thin air, and no one thought it worth mentioning again. When it was over, my mother kissed my cheek the way you kiss a polite guest. "Drive safe," she said, her smile too careful. My father shook my brother's hand as if sealing a business deal. I slipped out into the Texas evening, the sky fading to indigo. In the driveway, I paused. The house I grew up in glowed warmly behind me, every window lit. Inside were photographs of me as a child, trophies with my name engraved, 1,000 small reminders that I had belonged here. And yet in one sentence, belonging had been rewritten. I slid into my car, gripped the steering wheel, and sat motionless as the air conditioner hummed. The betrayal didn't roar, it settled, heavy and undeniable, pressing against my chest. As I drove away past the familiar streets and quiet porches, something inside me whispered. Not loudly, not yet, but enough for me to hear. If they have no place for you in their story, you will have to write your own. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. The road home felt longer than usual that night. Dallas glimmered outside my windshield. Neon signs flickered, gas stations hummed. Couples strolled along sidewalks under the soft glow of street lamps. It was a living city, moving in its rhythm, but I felt like a ghost traveling through it. At every red light, I caught myself staring into nothing, hands fixed to the steering wheel, replaying my father's words like a broken tape. "Your brother will inherit the estate. Everything is already arranged." Each repetition hollowed me a little more, like water wearing down stone. By the time I pulled into the cracked parking lot of my apartment building, my chest felt heavy, as though I'd carried home an invisible weight no one could see. My one-bedroom unit on the third floor smelled faintly of old paint and last night's takeout. The fridge hummed louder than usual, the silence filling every corner. I set my keys on the counter and sat at the edge of the bed without turning on the lights. The darkness was kinder. It asked for nothing. People talk about betrayal as though it comes with fire, shouting, slammed doors, shattered glass. But this betrayal came as stillness, a quiet dismissal, and somehow that was worse. I thought about my job at the marketing agency, the endless cycle of toothpaste ads and cereal box slogans. My parents never asked about my work, never seemed to think it amounted to much. To them, my paycheck was a placeholder until a husband's paycheck took its place. That was their vision for me, stability, not independence. And then there was my brother. He had never kept a steady job, but still they believed in his promise. His failures were temporary setbacks. My efforts were just a phase. They spoke of him as if the world was his by birthright, and of me as if my future was always borrowed. Lying there in the dark, I felt the old ache return, the one I'd carried since childhood. The science fair ribbon I had pinned proudly to my wall, the debate trophy they never mentioned. The nights I stayed up helping with bills while my brother slept. None of it mattered, not to them, but something had shifted inside me at that dinner table, though I couldn't yet name it. Beneath the hurt was a small, insistent spark, fragile but alive. If my family had no place for me in their future, then perhaps I would have to build one of my own. I reached for the notebook on my nightstand, its cover worn from years of false starts and abandoned plans. My hand trembled as I flipped to a blank page. For a long time, the lines stared back at me, empty and expectant. Then, slowly, I wrote 4 words. Build something that lasts. The pen left a deep groove on the paper, as if carving the words into more than just a page. I closed the notebook, placed it on my chest, and lay back against the pillow. Outside my window, the city carried on without me, but for the first time in years, I felt the faint outline of another life pressing at the edges of my own. When I was a child, I learned early how differently love could be measured under one roof. I remember being 8 years old, standing in the kitchen with a ribbon clutched in my hand. It was blue, first place at the district science fair. I had built a tiny model of a solar system, every planet painted carefully from old marbles and styrofoam balls. My father glanced up from his newspaper, gave me a polite nod, and said, "That's nice, sweetheart." Then he went back to the stock listings, as though the universe I had painted was too small to compete with numbers on a page. 2 weeks later, my brother scored a touchdown in a middle school football game. The living room erupted like we had won a national championship. My father hung his muddy jersey on the wall above the mantel, right where every guest could see it. My mother clapped until her hands turned red. That was the day I began to understand. Achievement for me was decoration, but achievement for him was legacy. It was never spoken out loud. It didn't have to be. It lived in the little things, the extra helpings of dessert for him, the gentle excuses made when he failed a class, the way my parents looked at me when I said I wanted to study literature in college. "That's not practical, Rachel," my father said, as though practicality was the only compass worth following. He used to tell me, "Boys carry the name, girls carry the stories." At the time, I didn't question it. I thought it was just another one of those sayings parents pass down, like warnings not to sit too close to the television or to always carry an umbrella in April. But years later, sitting in the silence of my apartment, the words pressed harder. They weren't just a saying. They were a verdict. The lie I swallowed was that my worth would always be measured by someone else's approval. That if my father didn't clap for me, if my mother didn't smile, if my brother didn't notice, then maybe my victories didn't matter at all. That inheritance, whether money, respect, or love, was something handed down, not something I could claim on my own. At 36, I saw it differently. That night at the table, when my name never crossed their lips, the lie finally revealed itself. It wasn't that I lacked value. It was that they lacked vision. But knowing that didn't dull the sting. When your family overlooks you, it cuts deeper than any stranger's dismissal. Blood should bind. Instead, it reminded me of my place, quiet, secondary, unnecessary. I turned the phrase over in my mind again and again. Boys carry the name, girls carry the stories. And I thought, then let me write a story they'll never forget. The Monday after that dinner, I sat at my desk in the marketing agency, staring at a half-written toothpaste slogan on my screen. The cursor blinked like it was mocking me, steady, endless, reminding me how small my life had become. Around me, phones rang, keyboards clicked. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee from the break room pot that had been brewing since dawn. People laughed in short bursts, conversations about weekend barbecues or football games. But I heard none of it. My father's voice still echoed, louder than the office noise. Your brother will inherit the estate. Everything is already arranged. That afternoon, I walked into my manager's office. He was a tired man with graying hair and an ever-present stain on his shirt sleeve. He glanced up from a pile of drafts and asked, "Rachel, you all right?" I wasn't. And for the first time, I didn't pretend I was. "I'm resigning," I said. He blinked, as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. "Are you sure? It's stable here." Stable, that word again. Stability was the cage they had built for me, wrapped in polite approval and a paycheck that barely paid rent. I wanted more than survival. I wanted to breathe. By Friday, my nameplate was gone from the cubicle wall. I carried a cardboard box with 2 framed photos, a coffee mug, and the kind of nervous hope that feels heavier than despair. I used the last paycheck to buy a secondhand laptop from a pawn shop, its keys worn smooth from other people's stories. Then I rented a corner desk in a shared office downtown. The room was filled with mismatched furniture, squeaky chairs, and the smell of reheated lunches. But when I sat down, it felt like freedom. In the beginning, the work was small, almost laughably so. I designed a flyer for a bakery trying to sell more muffins. I built a simple website for a man who sold guitars from his garage. I wrote product descriptions for handmade candles someone shipped from their kitchen. The jobs came through favors, Craigslist posts, whispers from friends of friends. The pay barely covered groceries, but each project was mine. Nights bled into mornings. I stayed up teaching myself everything I could, digital ads, branding, analytics. I filled notebooks with scribbles and arrows, diagrams no one else would understand. I drank too much coffee, fell asleep on the keyboard more than once, and woke with lines pressed into my cheek from the space bar. There were moments I doubted everything. Times I stared at the unpaid bills on the counter and wondered if my father was right, that I wasn't practical, that I was destined to remain small, that women like me were not meant to build. But then I would open my notebook, run my finger over the groove of those 4 words, build something that lasts, and the ember inside me would glow again. I didn't know what that something was yet. All I knew was this: I could not go back to being invisible, not to them, not to myself. And so, brick by brick, project by project, I began to build. Opportunities rarely arrive with introductions. They show up wearing ordinary clothes and ask small questions, the kind you could ignore if you were tired or proud or afraid. It was a Thursday when the bakery lady called, the one whose flyer I'd designed with a cartoon muffin that looked too happy for a Monday morning. Her voice was thready with worry. "Rachel, people like the flyer, but I need more than pretty paper. I need people to find me online. Can you help with that?" I could have said no. I could have admitted I didn't know enough yet, that my nights learning ad platforms and search terms and conversion funnels were still just notes and arrows and coffee stains. But something steadied inside me. "Yes," I said. "I can." I spent the next weekend buried in dashboards I barely understood, translating numbers into choices. I rewrote her website copy so it sounded like a person and not a menu. I photographed her blueberry muffins near the front window at 7 a.m., when the light was soft and forgiving. I ran a small ad campaign that cost less than a family dinner and reached more people than the sign out front had in 2 years. 2 weeks later, she called again, this time laughing. "We sold out by noon. I had to bake a second batch. I hired a part-time kid to keep up. Whatever you did, do more." Do more became a refrain. The flower shop around the corner heard from the baker. A family-owned hardware store heard from the florist. A man who sold secondhand guitars out of his garage heard from the guy who fixed the florist's leaky sink. One client turned into 3, then 5. I raised my rate and no one flinched. They didn't need a miracle. They needed someone who would stay late, learn fast, and care. The co-working space, with its mismatched chairs and microwave popcorn smell, became a kind of chapel. I arrived before the sun and left when the night janitor propped the door open to let the cool air in. I learned to love the click of my own keyboard. There is a music to building, quiet, persistent, without a melody you can hum but you know when you hear it. I bought a small whiteboard and wrote 3 columns in black marker. Listen, solve, repeat. It kept me honest. When I forgot, I listened again. The day I realized I could not keep doing this alone came gently. My inbox was a tangle of yesies. My phone lit up with unknown numbers that all began, "I heard about you from." I was dropping balls I didn't even know I'd been juggling. So I posted a simple note on a local board, part-time assistant, organized, good with people, must not be afraid of honest work or bad coffee. Her name was Maya. She was 24, with a notebook full of tidy lists and a laugh that made the room feel wider. She asked smart questions and didn't pretend to know what she didn't. On her first day, she labeled my chaos. On her second, she told me I was undercharging. On her third, she answered the phone with a confidence I hadn't dared borrow for myself. "Horizon Creative," she said, as if the name already existed. "Is that what we're called now?" I asked, surprised by how right it sounded. She shrugged. "Feels like where you're headed." I wrote it on the whiteboard beneath the 3 columns, Horizon Creative. The letters looked tentative, like stepping stones across a creek. I stepped anyway. We built a simple website in an evening and put our first case studies on it. The bakery with the sellouts, the florist whose Valentine's Day orders doubled, the guitar man who had to rent a storage unit because his garage ran out of space. The site didn't sing, but it told the truth. It told our truth. A regional clothing brand called after that. They'd seen our florist campaign. "You seem small," the woman on the line said, not unkindly. "We are," I said. "But small means we won't miss the details, and we'll fight harder than people who think your account is a line on a spreadsheet." There was a pause, long enough for me to imagine my father listing reasons why this was impractical. Then she said, "Come in Monday." I wore my best blazer and my steadiest shoes. Maya came with a portfolio and that widening laugh tucked away like a secret. The conference room smelled like iced lemon water and ambition. We talked for an hour about their customers, their quiet seasons, the way their brand looked like it belonged to someone older than the people who were actually buying. When it was over, the woman slid a folder across the table. "We're testing you," she said. 3 months. If you deliver, we talk annual." The number on the paper made my throat tighten. It was more than my first year at the agency. It was more than my brother had ever earned on purpose. I signed slowly, the pen feeling heavier than gold. After they left, Meyer and I stood in the echo of the empty room, grinning like thieves who had stolen nothing but their own doubt. In the elevator, she squeezed my hand once and said, "You did that." I shook my head. We did that. The work was a grind, the kind that sands you smooth. We redrew their online storefront, shrunk the friction in their checkout, told their story like it belonged to people who laughed on sidewalks and spilled coffee on new jeans. We watched the graphs climb the way children watch kites, nervous until the string pulls steady. By month 2, returns dipped. By month 3, sales rose enough that the CFO sat in on our call and asked about next quarter. When the annual contract came, I took it home and laid it on my kitchen table, the one that fit 2 plates and a bowl of apples. I didn't frame it. I didn't take a picture. I just sat with it, and in the quiet, I heard a familiar voice in my head say practical. For once, it didn't hurt. Practical had become something I could shape with my own hands. We painted our name on the office door, just a decal, white on glass, Horizon Creative. Clients began to bring us problems the way neighbors bring casseroles when they've heard the news. We answered the phone with ease now. "Horizon, this is Maya. Horizon, this is Rachel." I liked the sound of it, the way it landed. Real, chosen. Some nights, walking to my car, I'd pass a family gathered around a restaurant table, kids swinging their feet, mothers cutting meat into smaller pieces, fathers telling stories with big hands. I would feel that ache again, the old one, but it had changed shape. It wasn't a hunger anymore. It was a memory, and memories don't own you unless you let them. On a Wednesday, while reviewing ad performance and arguing with a stubborn spreadsheet, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. My mother, then my father, then my brother. The calls stacked like plates no one wanted to wash. I let them ring. I had a deadline. Maya glanced over. "Everything okay?" "Not yet," I said, and meant it as a promise to myself. We stayed late that night, the city laying its necklace of lights along the horizon. When we finally shut the laptops, my reflection looked back at me from the office glass, older than the girl at the oak table, steadier than the woman in the dark apartment, still learning, still tired, but undeniably present. No one had named me heir, so I named myself Builder. And the thing about builders is this: we don't wait for doors to open. We learn the weight of the hinges. We learn the shape of the key. And then, one ordinary Thursday at a time, we let ourselves in. The first real signs of success don't always show up in the bank account. Sometimes, they arrive in smaller ways. A knock on the office door from a client bringing cupcakes because their business had its best month in years. Or the way Maya began walking into meetings with her head a little higher, no longer the assistant but a partner in something that mattered. But success has a way of echoing, of reaching ears you thought had stopped listening. It started with a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was careful, stretched thin, like fabric pulled too tight. "Rachel, I hope you're well. We've had some troubles here. Your brother's been going through a difficult time. Call me when you can." I didn't call, not yet. I let her words settle on my phone like dust. A week later, my father left a message. His voice, once so firm, carried something I had never heard before: hesitation. "You've done well for yourself. We've seen articles, things people have said. I know we don't say it enough, but we're proud. The truth is, we could use some help. Your brother made some poor choices. He just needs a little support, you understand." Proud. The word sat in my chest like a stone. Where was that pride when I brought home blue ribbons, when I signed my first lease alone, when I sat at their table invisible? Now it came not as a gift, but as a transaction. The calls kept coming. One day I returned from lunch to find 16 missed calls stacked like bricks on my screen. Mother, father, brother, again and again. The sound of their names flashing across my phone was like hearing ghosts knocking at the door of a house I had already left. When the texts arrived, they grew sharper. "Please, Rachel, don't let us lose everything. He's still your brother. Family sticks together. Do you really want us to suffer like this?" I sat in the office after hours, the lights of Dallas winking through the glass, my reflection caught between the glow of the city and the dark of the room. Maya had gone home hours earlier. The hum of the computer was the only sound. I thought about the years I had chased their approval, how silence had been my answer when they erased me. And now, silence was theirs to taste. But even in that quiet, I felt something different than anger. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to see them broken. What I wanted was something cleaner, recognition that I had built myself without their blessing, and I had survived the storm they thought would drown me. When I finally answered, my father's voice cracked like a man who had swallowed too much pride too quickly. "Rachel, we need you." I closed my eyes. For a moment I saw the oak table, the roast chicken, the wine glass tilting toward my mother's lips, the smile on my brother's face when he inherited everything that night. And then I saw the office door with its white letters, Horizon Creative, letters no one had given me, letters I had carved into my own life. "I will help," I said, steady and calm, "but on my terms, not because you gave me anything, not because I owe him, but because I chose myself, and in choosing myself, I found enough strength to choose differently now." The silence on the other end was long, heavy. Then my mother's voice, softer than I remembered, whispered, "Thank you." I set the phone down, not triumphant, not broken, just certain. Because sometimes the truest inheritance is not money or property or even a name. It is the moment you decide that no one else gets to write your story but you. In the days after that phone call, something shifted inside me. It wasn't relief, not exactly. It wasn't triumph either. It was quieter than that, like finally exhaling after holding your breath for years. I went about my work as usual. Mornings at the office with coffee cooling too quickly on my desk, afternoons packed with client meetings, evenings stretching into nights where Meyer and I scribbled new campaigns on the whiteboard until the markers dried out. But beneath all of it, there was a new awareness. I was no longer living in the shadow of what had been denied me. I was standing fully in what I had built. Sometimes, on the way home, I would drive past the neighborhood where my parents still lived. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The lawn was neat, the porch light still flicked on at dusk, but it no longer felt like the fortress I once believed it to be. It was just a house. And houses, I had learned, do not define you. I thought back to the girl clutching her science fair ribbon, to the woman sitting wordless at the dinner table, to the nights spent alone in a one-bedroom apartment with only a notebook to keep her company. Each version of me had been waiting, for applause, for recognition, for love offered freely. Now I understood something I hadn't before. Waiting is another kind of silence, and silence does not build. The empire I was building wasn't only a company. It was a reclamation of voice, of dignity, of presence. Every client we helped, every campaign that thrived, every late night spent fighting through doubt, it was all proof that I had taken rejection and turned it into architecture. I began writing down pieces of this realization in the margins of my notebooks. Simple lines, the kind you might overhear in a church basement or scribble on the back of a receipt. Your worth is not borrowed. Silence does not save you. Build something that lasts. They weren't business strategies, they were reminders, and they steadied me in moments when the past tried to whisper otherwise. One evening, Maya found one of those scraps of paper on my desk. She read it quietly, then looked at me with a kind of recognition I hadn't expected. "You should share this," she said. "People need to hear it." I smiled but shook my head. "It's just for me." But later that night, sitting in my car under the spill of city lights, I realized she was right. These words weren't just about me. They were for anyone who had ever been told they were less, anyone who had been erased in their own home, anyone who needed proof that survival could turn into something greater. That was when I understood. The story I was writing was larger than Horizon Creative, larger than any contract or office door decal. It was about inheritance in its truest form, the legacies we choose to carry forward when the ones handed to us fall short. And for the first time, I felt a strange kind of gratitude. Not for the pain, not for the silence, but for the clarity it had forced upon me. Without their dismissal, I might never have found the courage to choose myself. As the city pulsed around me, I sat in the quiet hum of the car and whispered to the empty air, "This is my story now." Growth rarely announces itself with trumpets. It shows up as small proofs that multiply. An inbox too full for one person to handle. A calendar dotted with colored blocks that leave no room for doubt. A landlord who suddenly returns calls quickly because your rent is never late. By spring, Horizon Creative felt less like a hopeful idea and more like a living thing with a pulse. We outgrew the corner office and moved 2 floors up to a space with windows that swallowed the afternoon light and spit it back as resolve. Maya taped a crooked plant to the sill with a note that said, "Please live." Somehow it did. We bought matching mugs, not because matching mattered, but because it felt like we suddenly could. The wins stacked quietly. The regional clothing brand extended their contract. A nonprofit helping single mothers came to us after a board member saw our work and said, "Make people feel what we feel." We did, and donations climbed in ways that made us both proud and careful. A local chain of diners asked us to bring back Saturday mornings, so we rebuilt their story around pancakes and Little League schedules, and the way coffee tastes better when someone remembers your name. Tables filled. The manager sent us a photo of a hostess stand with a wait list curled like ribbon. We hired 2 more. Evan, who could see patterns in data the way birders see a flash of color and know a species, and Leela, whose copy read like people talking on porches at dusk. I watched them find their stride and felt the strange, parental tug of wanting to make room for other people's victories. It surprised me how good that felt. On a Tuesday, a package arrived, weighty brown paper, no return address. Inside was a framed article from a regional business magazine, "Small Firm, Big Heart, the agency making Main Street matter again." Beneath the headline was a photo of Maya and me, slightly out of focus, caught mid-laugh. Someone, probably Maya, hung it in the kitchen, slightly crooked, next to the plant that kept refusing to die. There were still hard days. Campaigns that fell flat like balloons left in the sun. Clients who wanted miracles on budgets that couldn't afford midnight oil. A week where our project board looked like a battlefield and every sticky note felt like a red flag. But even then, the ground under us didn't shift the way it used to. The floor held. We had learned how to distribute the weight. One afternoon, the clothing brand's CFO invited us to their warehouse. "You ought to see what you did," he said, as if we'd built a bridge with our hands. We walked past rows of new inventory, sunlight pouring through clerestory windows, employees moving with practiced choreography. A young associate scanned boxes with a grin so wide I didn't ask the reason. He offered it anyway. "We're hiring," he said. "My sister starts next week." That stuck to me longer than the quarterly chart he showed later. I noticed other changes, too. The way clients said our name, Horizon, with the easy confidence of something they trusted. The way Maya negotiated timelines without flinching. The way I began to say no to projects that didn't fit, not out of arrogance but out of respect for the work and for us. Saying no, I learned, is a form of stewardship. Money followed, steady rather than sudden. I raised salaries, added health coverage, started a modest profit share that made the room louder on Fridays. I took my first vacation in years, a long weekend on the Gulf, where the water turned the color of faded jade at noon. I brought back seashells that looked like little ears and left them in a jar near reception, a reminder to keep listening. At night, When the office emptied and the city unspooled its lights along the highway, I would stand by the window and think about beginnings. The pawn shop laptop, the first flyer with the grinning muffin, the co-working chairs that always squeaked at the worst time. Each small step had been a seed I wanted to dismiss. Each had grown anyway. Sometimes the past tapped on the glass. It came as a flash of a dining room, a napkin folded with verdict, a mother's lipstick moon on crystal. The ache didn't vanish, it evolved. Pain, I learned, can be recycled into purpose with enough patience and honest work. I didn't forgive to absolve them. I forgave so the story could move. One evening, as we packed up, Leela paused by the framed article and said, "It's funny. The word empire used to make me think of marble and noise. This," she swept her hand at the desks, the plant, the mugs with faint coffee crescents, "feels like an empire that remembers why it exists." I thought of the girls and women who had written to our contact form after the article ran, telling us that the science fair ribbon and the football jersey lived in their houses, too. I thought of the non-profit checks that didn't bounce anymore, the hostess stand with a wait list on a Saturday, the employee who told his sister there was finally room for her. Maybe empire was the wrong word, or maybe it was right if you understood it this way. Not crowns and gates, but people and work and the stubborn gentleness of showing up again tomorrow. The kind of empire that doesn't conquer, it sustains. When we turned off the lights, the plant on the sill was a darker silhouette against the street lamps. I touched the leaf with the taped stem and smiled at the audacity of survival. We locked the door. The decal, Horizon Creative, caught the hallway glow and held it. And for a moment in the quiet, I heard the softest echo of what used to hurt, and I knew. I had not outrun the past. I had built far enough into the future that it could no longer tell me who I was. Trouble has a way of showing up with paperwork. It doesn't arrive as thunder. It arrives as envelopes, thick ones, addressed in block letters, stamped with words like final notice and immediate action required. When I finally drove over to my parents' house, the porch light blinked at dusk the way it always had. But the lawn had gone a little wild at the edges, as if even the grass had lost its sense of direction. Inside, the dining room table, the scene of so many verdicts, was buried under statements, mortgage summaries, delinquent taxes, a letter from a bank I recognized because I'd once helped a client rewrite their homepage to sound more human. My mother moved the papers aside as if clearing plates after a meal. "Tea?" she asked, defaulting to hospitality the way some people default to prayer. My father sat straighter than usual, but his hands betrayed him, thumb rubbing knuckle, knuckle rubbing palm, like a man trying to erase what won't come off. "We're behind," he said. "Your brother's ventures didn't pan out. Some partners weren't honest. He overextended. It all happened so fast. Fast is a kindness we offer our mistakes. The truth tends to be slower." My brother came in from the back room a moment later. He looked taller still, but smaller somehow, shoulders rounding inward, eyes carrying the distance people get when they've been staring at one problem too long. "Ratch," he said, the nickname from a softer decade. I didn't mean for it to get like this. We spread the papers across the table. The house had been refinanced twice. The second mortgage floated at an interest rate that punished hope. The investment account, once a tidy safety net, had been siphoned to cover bridge loans that never bridged. A credit line, opened under the promise of short-term liquidity, had matured into a trap. It was not one bad choice. It was a symphony of almosts and nearlys and just this once. I listened. I asked the questions no one wanted to say aloud. When dates and numbers formed a shape I could hold, I took out my notebook, the same one that held the groove of build something that lasts, and drew 3 columns. What's urgent? What's negotiable? What's gone? Urgent was the bank that would move to foreclose within 60 days. Negotiable was the credit line if someone who spoke their language called with a plan. Gone was the account that could not be resurrected by wishing. My father watched my pen. "You always did like your lists," he said, a sentence that tried to be light and landed a little heavy. "I like to see where the ground is," I said. We spent the afternoon on the phone. I handed my mother a script for the bank, short, firm, human. She read it twice, then a third time, practicing the part where she said we instead of I because the house was a plural thing, even now. I coached my brother through a call to the credit union. No excuses, only facts and a proposal. He stumbled on the word responsibility and tried again until it didn't choke him. Progress came in inches. The bank agreed to a forbearance if we submitted a packet by Friday. The credit union offered a restructure with conditions my brother would have to meet in weeks, not months. The predatory loan with the Too Slick website would not bend. We moved it to the far column and wrote one word: exit. When the calls ended, the house felt different. Not lighter, not yet, but oriented, like someone had turned on a porch light in a storm. We ate leftovers at the kitchen island, my mother insisting, as mothers do, that food is a kind of mercy. My father asked about the office. He tried to say horizon and did not choke on it. My brother asked what exactly I did all day, and for the first time the question didn't offend me. I told him. He nodded as if learning a new language that, with effort, might one day be his. Before I left, I set 3 envelopes on the table, checks already written. One to stop the immediate bleeding. One to pay the attorney who would do the unglamorous work of paperwork and deadlines. One smaller, addressed to my parents with household in the memo line. My brother reached for it. "Not yours," I said gently. "Not this time." He pulled his hand back and stared at his palms as if looking for the place where things had slipped through. "I'm sorry," he said. It wasn't the flippant sorry of boys who expect the world to reset by morning. It had weight. "This won't fix the pattern," I said. "Money rarely does, but it buys time. Use it well." On the porch, my mother hugged me longer than the church lady hug. She smelled like laundry soap and the lemon oil she used on furniture that outlasted our arguments. "You didn't have to," she whispered. "I know," I said. That was the point. Driving away, I passed the park where we used to fly kites on windy Sundays. I remembered the terror and delight of letting the string run and trusting the pull. That's what this felt like now. Not rescue, exactly, but release. Not a return to the old story, but a choice to keep writing mine without bitterness hardening the ink. At home, I set my keys down and opened the notebook again. Beneath "build something that lasts," I wrote a second line: "Give only what won't break the foundation." It was a boundary set as a blessing. The phone buzzed, a text from Maya. "How did it go?" "We found the ground," I replied. "We'll see if they stand on it." I turned off the lights and let the quiet fill the room. The city breathed through the window, steady as a sleeping thing. Somewhere, a family sat at a table and decided a future. Somewhere else, a woman pressed a pen into paper and made a promise. I had learned that inheritance could be taken, misused, misplaced. But stories, the ones we live on purpose, have a way of returning to us even after long detours. And if we're careful, if we're honest, if we keep building, they become something we can pass on without fear. Not marble and titles, but courage shaped like a life. The next morning began with lists. Not the frantic kind that multiply when panic is steering, but the steady kind that builds a road under your feet. I emailed the bank's packet before breakfast, attached scans that made a paper life look coherent. Pay stubs, tax returns, statements lined up like dominoes that, if placed carefully, would not fall. I CC'd the attorney and titled the subject line in plain English: "Forbearance Request, Morgan Residence." I have found institutions like 3 things: clarity, courtesy, and deadlines that arrive early. I called my parents to walk them through what would come next: appraisals, signatures, the quiet indignities of proving you belong in the home you've paid for all these years. My mother kept a pen in hand like a talisman. My father wrote down every appointment time as if punctuality could be a shield. By noon, I met my brother at a diner halfway between my office and their house. The kind with coffee that tastes like persistence and a waitress who calls you hun, without checking if you've earned it. He wore a shirt he hadn't ironed and an expression he was trying to. We ordered pancakes we didn't finish. "I made a budget," I said, sliding a folder across the table. He blinked like I'd handed him a bird. "It's built from your actual numbers," I added. "Not the optimistic ones, the reality ones." He took a breath that turned into a laugh that wasn't one. "I never learned how to do this," he said quietly. "I kept thinking the next deal would fix the last mistake." "Nexts don't fix lasts," I said. "They stack." We set rules not as punishment but as scaffolding. No new credit cards. No short-term loans with fine print that fattens in the dark. A hard pause on investments with glossy pitch decks and founders who say trust me too often. 2 part-time jobs now, a full-time search that doesn't end when rejection arrives. He nodded at each one like a man touching the rails of a bridge he does not yet trust to hold him. "And the house?" he asked, voice small. "The house is theirs," I said. "Yours is a room in it. Treat it like a room given back to you, not a kingdom." He stared at the syrup puddling under a strawberry slice and said, "I was awful to you." There was no defense in it, and that made it heavier. I thought the world was mine. I thought loving me meant making it easier. "Love does many things," I said, "but it doesn't keep you from learning." When I returned to the office, Maya had arranged the conference table with color-coded folders: bank, credit union, attorney, utilities. She had also put a sticky note on my monitor: "Remember to eat." It made me smile, the way building invites caretaking, not just of projects, but of people. We worked until the light bent long across the floor. In the pauses, I answered my mother's texts, photos of forms, questions about lines that seemed to repeat themselves, a snapshot of the mantel now empty where the jersey had once hung. She didn't mention it. She didn't have to. That evening, my father called. His voice carried the careful dignity of a man rehearsing humility. "Your mother says we're through the first gate," he said. "I'm grateful, Rachel." I sat with the word, let it find a place in me that didn't need to argue with it. "You're welcome," I said. On the line, he breathed like someone unused to receiving help from a direction he'd never faced before. Later, alone in my apartment, I pulled out the old notebook and added a 3rd line beneath the others: "Help that doesn't erase you." I underlined it twice. Boundaries, I have learned, are not walls to keep feeling out. They are doors you decide who can walk through and when. Over the next week, we moved through the machinery of amends. The banker with the careful hair who knew the exact volume to lower his voice when saying foreclosure. The attorney who spoke in landmarks, next Friday, 60 days, recorded document. The credit union manager who reminded my brother that grace is not a blank check, but a dated one. I watched my family stand in rooms where they had once assumed they would never have to stand. It was a strange mercy. The day the forbearance was approved, my mother sent a photo of the porch light at dusk with a single text: "It's on." I stared at it longer than I meant to, not because the house had become mine again, no, but because light, when lit on purpose, says more than we give it credit for. That weekend, I drove them to the grocery store. My father insisted on pushing the cart. My mother debated apples by weight, not shine. At the checkout, my brother slipped a 10 out of his wallet toward the total. It wasn't much. It was honest. We walked out with paper bags that crinkled in a way that felt like progress. Back at their house, my father paused by the hallway where our school photos hung in chronological order, year after year of haircuts and hopeful smiles. He touched the frame with my second-grade picture, the one with the missing tooth that made me look tougher than I felt. "We should add your article," he said, and I realized he meant the magazine piece in our office kitchen. He tried to grin. It came out shy. "You can add a plant," I said. We both laughed, and the hallway did not echo. There were still messes to clean. A predatory lender sent a legal letter 3 pages too long. The second mortgage servicer misapplied a payment and blamed a system that apparently made more mistakes than people did. We corrected gently once, firmly twice. Lawyers, I learned, are fluent in firm. One night, exhausted and unguarded, I asked Maya, "Am I doing the right thing?" She tilted her head. "You're doing a right thing the right way," she said. "There are others. This one fits you." "How do you know?" "Because you haven't disappeared." I thought about that, the complicated math of giving without subtraction. It felt like learning to carry a full glass across a crowded room. Head up, eyes forward, one careful step at a time. A few days later, I stopped by the house to drop off a folder. My mother was rearranging the living room, small changes that amount to a new room. The mantel, once a shrine to a season of someone else's victory, now held a photo of all 3 of us in a park we used to visit. Squinting into spring, no trophies, just faces. "Stay for dinner?" she asked. The invitation landed softly. I said yes. We ate simple food, roasted vegetables, chicken, a salad that tasted like someone had rinsed it too long. We talked about weather and neighbors and a new teacher at the elementary school who still sent home permission slips in real envelopes. No verdicts were delivered. No napkins were folded with ceremony. My father told a joke I had heard in some other life, and this time I laughed because the timing was better. My brother cleared the dishes without being asked, then returned to the table and sat, hands open, as if ready to learn something ordinary. On my way out, my father walked me to the car. The porch light glowed on steady. He put his hand on the door frame as if to ground himself. "Rachel," he said, "you didn't have to." "I know," I said again. "That's why it matters." Driving home, I thought of the word inheritance and how it can shrink a life if you let it. What they had withheld had once defined me. Now, what I withheld, resentment, the easy triumph of being right, defined me more. I wasn't rewriting the past. I was choosing the weight I would carry forward. When I reached my apartment, I set my keys down and stood by the window. The city pulsed in small, faithful lights. I pictured the office plant leaning toward the morning, the article hung crooked, Maya's neat labels corralling the unruly. I pictured my parents' mantle with a photograph that didn't brag, it remembered. I pictured my brother reading a budget like a map. In the notebook, beneath the 3 lines, I wrote a 4th, forgiveness that keeps its receipts. It made me smile, half joke, half vow. I turned off the lamp. In the dark, I could still see the shape of what I was building. Not a fortress against the past, but a house with good bones, doors that opened and closed as needed, windows that let in light but kept out the storm, a foundation poured from work and care and the stubborn choice to remain visible. Outside, somewhere, a porch light came on. Inside, a story kept going. In the quiet that followed, I came to see inheritance differently. It was never truly about property lines or bank accounts. Those things fade, get spent, or slip through careless hands. What endures is the courage to keep building, even when no one believes you can. My parents still live in that house, though now it feels less like a monument and more like a shelter. My brother is learning, slowly, awkwardly. That responsibility is not inherited, but practiced. And I, the daughter who once sat silent at the dinner table, have found my voice. I don't sit around waiting for their approval anymore. I don't measure my worth against their choices. I have learned to build something that cannot be signed away with a pen or erased with a sentence. A life of my own making. If there is one thing I hope you take from my story, it is this. Your legacy is not decided for you. You decided every day in the small steps you take, the boundaries you set, the hope you refuse to give up on. And sometimes, being written out of someone else's will is the very thing that gives you the freedom to write your own. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope in some part of it, you saw a reflection of your own journey, or at least a reminder that you are never powerless to choose again. I wish you good health, peace in your days, and a family that holds you close for who you are. And if this story spoke to you, consider subscribing to the channel so we can keep walking through these stories together. From my heart to yours, take care.